Harold Kingston had built his financial empire from the ground up. No silver spoon, no shortcuts, just decades of determination, strategy, and an unwavering commitment to doing things the right way. He began as a college student with a dream and a pocket full of rejection letters, pushing through doors that were never meant to open for someone like him. Now, his name was emblazoned on the letterhead of one of the fastest-growing banks in the country. His decisions impacted the lives of thousands, customers, employees, shareholders. But recently, something had been bothering him. He had always taken pride in running a business built on integrity. Yet in the past few months, rumors had reached his ears. Complaints, subtle at first, but growing louder, of customers being ignored, dismissed, or subtly pushed away. It did not sit well with him. Harold did not rely on secondhand reports. He had never done so. If something needed to be understood, he needed to see it firsthand. That is when the plan formed. No warning, no assistance, no cameras, just him. He entered his closet that morning, ignoring the racks of designer suits, the silk ties, the polished leather shoes. Instead, he grabbed an old navy polo and a pair of jeans. Plain, nothing that would scream wealth or influence. His Rolex stayed on the nightstand, and he slipped into a pair of sneakers with slightly worn soles. When he stood before the mirror, the man who looked back was still Harold Kingston, but stripped of every outward symbol of power. No tailored suit, no commanding presence, just another man, another customer. Perfect, he grabbed his phone and called for a cab, not his usual private driver. As the cab made its way through Los Angeles, Harold could feel the weight of curiosity on him. Would this be a waste of time? Would his employees rise to the standard he had set, or would he confirm his worst fears? The drive was quiet. Outside, the city moved in its usual restless rhythm. Businessmen checking their watches, tourists snapping pictures, street vendors setting up for the afternoon rush. But inside the cab, Harold was deep in thought. Maybe the complaints were exaggerated. Perhaps they were isolated incidents. But maybe they were not. The driver pulled up to the curb in front of one of his branches, a sleek, modern building nestled between a high-end coffee shop and an insurance office. It was the kind of bank designed to feel approachable yet professional. Harold paid the driver, stepped out, and took a deep breath. One step forward, then another. As soon as he pushed through those glass doors, the truth hit him harder than he was prepared for. Inside, the scent of freshly printed receipts and faint traces of cleaning solution lingered in the air. The bank was not crowded, just a handful of customers scattered around. Some seated, others standing in line. The walls were adorned with posters promoting investment plans, mortgage offers, and financial services. Harold took a few steps forward and paused. Not a single employee acknowledged him. At first, he thought he was imagining it. He glanced at the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on her nose, tapping away at her keyboard. He waited for her to look up, to nod, to smile, or offer a "Can I help you?" But nothing. Then, a man in a tailored suit walked in behind him, and the receptionist's demeanor changed instantly. She straightened, smiled, and greeted him with a warm, "Good morning, sir. How can we assist you today?" Harold watched as the man was directed to a teller almost immediately. He clenched his jaw but forced himself to remain calm. Maybe it was a fluke, he thought. Perhaps she had just been distracted. He stepped up to the counter, where a young teller was finishing up with another customer. Harold waited his turn, his hands in his pockets, casually glancing at the others in line. A well-dressed couple at the next window was receiving full attention. Smiles, nods, detailed explanations about their transaction. Then, it was his turn. The teller, a woman in her late 20s with perfectly curled hair, barely glanced at him. "What do you need?" Her voice was flat, disinterested. Harold gave her a polite smile. "I would like to open a new high-value account." She sighed as if he had just asked her to do something unbearable. "You need an appointment for that," she said. Harold frowned. "I checked your website before coming. It said walk-ins are welcome for new accounts." She barely looked up. "Yeah, well, not for those kinds of accounts." Harold glanced over at another customer at the next counter, another man in business attire. The teller there was walking him through account options with patience, handing him brochures, offering him coffee. Harold turned back to his teller. "So, just to be clear, if I look different, dressed differently, you would be treating me differently right now." She blinked, her expression tightening. "That is not what I said." Harold tilted his head. "But that is what you are doing." She exhaled sharply, clearly irritated. "Look, sir, maybe another branch would be a better fit for what you are looking for." His fingers curled into his palms, but he was not there to lash out. He was there to understand. So he took a breath and decided to continue testing the situation. "All right," he said calmly. "Maybe I just need some information first. Can you tell me about your business account options?" The teller glanced at the growing line behind him and sighed again. Without a word, she reached under the counter, pulled out a crumpled brochure, and slid it across the desk. No explanation. No offer to walk him through the details. Harold picked up the brochure and flipped through it. He already knew every word printed on it, but that was not the point. Across the room, another customer, an older man in a blazer, approached a different teller and asked the same question. The response was completely different. Enthusiastic, welcoming. The teller leaned forward, explained the benefits of various account types, even cracked a joke to make the process lighter. Harold looked down at the creased brochure in his hand and asked, "Is there someone I can speak to about account recommendations?" The teller's lips pressed into a thin line. "That would be the branch manager." "Great," Harold said. "I would like to speak with them." She hesitated before responding, the slightest smirk forming on her face. "He is busy." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Did you check? He's always busy," she said flatly. After a brief pause, she turned to the next person in line, effectively dismissing Harold without another word. Harold took a step back and just stood there for a moment. It was not just bad service, it was deliberate. He looked around the bank, observing how other customers were treated. Those who looked like they belonged were greeted with courtesy, efficiency, and patience. And then there was him, unnoticed, unwelcome, and unimportant. But he was not leaving yet. Not now. It was time to make his presence known. Harold was not the type of man who needed to raise his voice to get attention. His presence alone had been enough to build an empire. But now, stripped of his usual appearance, he was witnessing a reality that could not be ignored. He walked past the teller without another word and made his way toward the glass-paneled office at the back of the branch. The manager's door was slightly open, and through it, Harold saw a man in a tailored gray suit, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. "Busy." Harold knocked lightly on the doorframe. The manager barely looked up. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Yes. I was told I need an appointment to open a high-value account, but I just watched 2 other customers receive full service with no issues," Harold replied. The manager finally looked up. His eyes briefly scanned Harold's plain attire, the lack of designer labels, the worn sneakers. His expression shifted to something more polite but firm, the kind of smile that suggested he would rather not deal with Harold right now. "If you would like to apply for an account, I suggest you try one of our other branches," the manager said smoothly. Harold took a slow breath. "Why would I need to go to another branch when I am already at one of my own?" The manager's expression barely changed. "It is just a matter of weight." Harold furrowed his brows. "Your own?" he repeated. Harold reached into his pocket and pulled out his executive ID. He placed it on the manager's desk with the kind of quiet authority that needed no explanation. The room seemed to shrink as the manager's eyes flit from the ID to Harold's face and back to the ID. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Mr. Kingston, I did not realize," the manager stammered. Harold tilted his head. "Did not realize what?" The teller who had dismissed him earlier peeked around the corner, her face pale. The receptionist, who had barely acknowledged him, suddenly seemed very interested in her keyboard. The silence stretched. Harold let it hang for a moment before he spoke, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "You did not realize I was someone who mattered." The manager opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Harold leaned in slightly, his gaze unwavering. "Tell me, if I had not revealed who I was, how would this have ended? Would you have called security, escorted me out? Let me walk away thinking I was not good enough for my own institution?" the manager stammered. "Of course not, sir," Harold straightened. "But you already did." The weight of his words settled in the air like a storm about to break. And now, every single person in that branch was waiting to see what he would do next. Harold stood still, letting the moment sink in. The room was thick with discomfort. No one dared speak, hoping this would somehow pass, but it would not. At this time, the manager's face remained frozen in shock, but Harold could see the flicker of panic beneath it. The teller who had dismissed him stood near the counter, her arms tightly crossed over her chest, avoiding eye contact. Harold picked up his executive ID and slipped it back into his pocket. Then, in the same calm and steady voice, he asked, "How many other customers have you turned away like this?" Silence. His eyes scanned the room. "How many people have walked in here needing assistance and were made to feel small, dismissed, or told to take their business elsewhere?" The manager cleared his throat, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, I assure you, that is not how we operate." Harold let out a short, humorless laugh. "I just watched it happen to me. He shook his head, glancing at the employees. "And if this is how it happens when I am standing in front of you, I do not want to imagine how my customers are treated when no one is watching." The security guard had stepped closer, sensing the shift in energy. But Harold was a man who did not need force to make his point. Instead, he reached for his phone, tapped a few buttons, and hit call. "Good morning, Mrs. Holloway," he said when his executive assistant picked up. "I need an internal audit launched at the Los Angeles branch today." The manager paled. "Yes, today," Harold confirmed. "And while you are at it, have HR pull every customer complaint filed here the last 6 months. I want names. I want details." The employees shifted uncomfortably, the reality of the situation dawning on them. Harold ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket. Then he turned to the manager. "You have 1 hour to gather your staff in the conference room. We're going to have a conversation about what kind of bank this is and, more importantly, what kind of bank it will be moving forward." The manager hesitated before nodding stiffly. Harold noticed how the receptionist finally looked him in the eye and how the teller exhaled sharply. Realizing just how much damage she had caused with a single moment of bias. "Good," Harold said. "Because change is coming, and this time, no one is sweeping it under the rug." An hour later, the employees of the Los Angeles branch sat stiffly in the conference room, the air thick with unease. Harold Kingston stood at the head of the long table, his hands resting on the polished wood. He was not here to shout, nor was he here to fire anyone on the spot. However, he was here to ensure that every person in the room understood the gravity of what had just transpired. He allowed the silence to linger before speaking. "I built this institution from the ground up." His voice was steady and controlled. "Not because an opportunity was handed to me. Not because doors were opened for me. I built it because I had to fight for it. I understand what it feels like to be dismissed, to be overlooked, to be made to feel as though you do not belong. And the fact that this is happening inside my own bank." He shook his head. "I will not tolerate it." Some of the staff avoided his gaze. The manager cleared his throat, but wisely remained silent. Harold continued. "I walked into this branch today as a regular customer. I did not drop my name. I did not expect preferential treatment. But what I did expect, what any customer should expect, is basic respect." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "What I received instead was excuses, dismissiveness, and barriers thrown in my way for no reason other than someone deciding I was not worth their time." The teller who had refused to assist him shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Harold turned his gaze towards her. "Would you care to explain why you assumed I was not here for legitimate business?" Her face flushed red. She opened her mouth but closed it without speaking. Harold gave her a moment. "Nothing?" he asked. "I just thought," she began, but her words trailed off. Harold nodded once. "That is the problem, isn't it?" The room was painfully still. He exhaled slowly, then shifted gears. "I do not run my business based on who looks the part and who does not. I run it on trust, on service, on ensuring that when someone walks through those doors, they feel valued, not judged." He paused for emphasis. "If you cannot provide that, you do not belong here." A heavy silence fell. Then he continued, "Now, here is what is going to happen. Every one of you will undergo new training on customer relations, and it will not be just a quick seminar where you nod along and return to business as usual. It will be real. It will be uncomfortable because that is what change feels like." The manager cleared his throat. "Sir," the manager began, but Harold cut in smoothly. "You will be the first one in that training," Harold said. "Since leadership begins at the top." The manager closed his mouth. Harold straightened his posture. "This is not about punishment. It is about accountability. People deserve better. And from this moment forward, that is exactly what they will get." He scanned the room, taking in every nervous, guilty, and reflective expression. Then he picked up his phone and sent one final message, a direct email to every branch, a statement, a promise, a warning. From that moment on, no one would walk into one of his banks and feel as if they did not belong. Not on his watch. Some lessons hit hard, but the hardest lessons? They are the ones that change everything. What would you have done if you were in Harold's position? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe respect should never be a privilege but a standard, hit that subscribe button because stories like this need to be heard.